Hi there, my name is Aiden Friss. My teammates were Eric Sun and Johan Terblanche, and today we're going to talk about the Cambridge Analytica scandal. So many of you probably already know a little bit about this scandal, but just in case you need a quick refresher, Cambridge Analytica was a British political counseling firm that gathered the data of millions of Facebook users, according to Facebook themselves, up to 87 million people. And they use this data to create psychological profiles of those users to create targeted political ads. Now, at the time, people were already worried about election interference, so this scandal was a huge story at the time, and people wanted to know, among other things, how did Cambridge Analytica get access to all of that data? Again, up to 87 million people. Was Facebook hacked? The answer, surprisingly, is no. Cambridge Analytica did not hack Facebook. In fact, they didn't even use their API in a way it wasn't intended for. At the time, Facebook allowed app developers to access not just the Facebook data of the app's users, but also those users' friends. So they used a pre-existing app called This Is Your Digital Life, which had a user base of 300,000 people, and the average Facebook user has 338 friends. And if you multiply those two numbers together, well, you actually get over 100 million. But obviously there's some overlap between those friend groups, and Facebook did the math and found that up to 87 million people had their data harvested. So obviously this is a very complicated scandal, and you could probably make 10 ethical presentations out of it. But we want to focus specifically on Cambridge Analytica's methods for gathering their data. So we're not going to worry too much about what they use that data for. We're just going to look at how they gathered that data and see whether it was ethical. So no, we don't think that what Cambridge Analytica did was ethical. However, if I could play devil's advocate for a moment, data collection for the purposes of advertising is extremely common. Facebook is well known for doing this, and of course Google makes a ton of money with targeted ads and targeted political ads. So if this is such a common thing, was what Cambridge Analytica doing really that bad? Well, when it comes to privacy and using people's data, consent is everything. The users need to know that their data is being collected, what their data is being used for, etc., so that they can consent to that data being taken and used. So the question here really is, did Cambridge Analytica get proper consent from all of those users? Now, it could be argued that the users of that app, This Is Your Digital Life, had consented to their data being used as soon as they signed into the app using Facebook. However, as I mentioned earlier, Cambridge Analytica also collected data from those users' friends. And those friends of users clearly could not consent to having their data collected. They didn't even know it was being collected in the first place. They had consented to sharing their data with Facebook, but they had not consented to sharing it with Cambridge Analytica. Collecting personal data without consent, as Cambridge Analytica did, is always unethical. It doesn't matter how you collected the data or how you plan on using that data. If you don't get consent, it is unethical. Cambridge Analytica should not have taken advantage of Facebook's admittedly badly considered API to collect that data. So now it's worth asking ourselves, this was a huge scandal, it was all over the news. So what happened after the scandal? Less than you might think. Targeted political ads are still around, of course, including on Facebook, although the data used to target those ads is a little less personal than what Cambridge Analytica was doing. Facebook changed what information apps have access to, including closing that strange friends of users loophole that they had put in the API. Cambridge Analytica shut down in the aftermath of this controversy, and Facebook was fined for mishandling users' data. Now we're going to look at the ethics of the situation through the lens of an ethical code. We decided to use the ACM Code of Ethics, which states in section 1.2, avoiding harm begins with careful consideration of potential impacts on all those affected by decisions. Facebook did not prevent bad actors from misusing their API, and Cambridge Analytica did not consider the potential impact of their actions. So both of them are in violation of this part of the code. And in section 1.6, it states that the retention and disposal periods for that information should be clearly defined, enforced, and communicated to data subjects. And the users of This Is Your Digital Life, the app that Cambridge Analytica used to gather this data, did not know how long their data would be kept. In fact, many of them didn't even know their data had been taken in the first place. And finally, the ACM Code of Ethics section 1.7 states that computing professionals should protect confidentiality. And when Cambridge Analytica took data that they had no right to without getting consent first, they violated confidentiality and therefore also violated this code of ethics. So how can we, as computer scientists and software engineers, learn from this scandal? We, as programmers, are responsible for protecting the data of our users and the public interest in general. Facebook, by leaving a hole in their API that left their users' data vulnerable, violated that responsibility. And Cambridge Analytica, by exploiting that loophole, also violated the responsibility of their users, the users of This Is Your Digital Life. We as programmers have to be much more careful than Facebook and Cambridge Analytica were. So to sum it all up, both Facebook and Cambridge Analytica acted unethically. Facebook acted unethically by leaving the personal private data of their users exposed, and Cambridge Analytica acted unethically by taking advantage of that exposure to take data that was not rightfully theirs and they did not get consent to take. And as a result of their unethical actions, Facebook ended up being fined and Cambridge Analytica shut down. And hopefully this scandal raised awareness about how important data protection is, not just for the public, but for us as programmers and software engineers. And if you take one thing away from this scandal and this presentation, it should be how important protecting users' data is. It isn't hard at all to imagine a situation where somebody uses methods similar to Cambridge Analytica, collects a ton of personal data, and uses that data to personalize scams, for instance. They could say, send a message to someone saying, "Hi, I'm your cousin Michael. I'm going through a tough time right now. Could you send me $100, for instance?" It's not hard at all to imagine that sort of scenario. So it's easy for us to sit back and say, well, look, it's just the names of like their cousins. Surely that can't be misused that badly. But it really can. So don't let the limits of your imagination stop you from doing the right thing. Just because you can't imagine how this data could be misused doesn't mean it can't be. All right, thank you for sitting through this presentation. And if you would like to ask some questions, now is the time to do it.